let's get started. So Pitch Club, really cool. I'd love to get your feedback, good or bad. Just let me know how I'm doing. So if you guys could vote for me on Pitch Club or give me your positive or negative feedback, I really appreciate that, just to know how I did, how you guys thought that I did. So if you need to know my Twitter handle, again, it's mkelly12 if you want to give me some good or bad feedback on Pitch Club. So who's here is following the Occupy movement? It's gotten a little kind of crazy recently. All right. On a lighter note, I've started my own less political movement called Occupy IE. I don't know if anybody's heard of this. It hasn't really taken off yet. But we had our first rally. I think it was pretty successful. There were no tents, but people certainly brought signs. Some people were really emotional. They were very sad. We've all had good and bad times with IE. Some people made some really clever signs. But after a while, things kind of like calmed down. People lost interest. They walked home. Except for there's always that one guy who's just like way into it. You know, his sign says, "Thank you, IE, for creating industry." So yeah. So with or without IE, the future is coming. The landscape of how people are using the web is changing. And we need to change with this. So I'm going to talk about today with responsive design. People are consuming our content on way more devices than they were 5 years ago. This is Liza Gardner. And she's in love with her devices. Most of these devices are actually Apple devices, so it's not really giving you the full picture. People are consuming your devices on all kinds of crazy things. So in some regards, the future is already here. Mobile traffic is huge, especially when we're talking about consuming content. Looking at this graph, excuse me. By 2015, traffic users are going to outnumber desktop users, and it's probably going to happen even sooner than that. If we're looking in different countries, taking more of a global view, across Asia and Africa, mobile accounts for more than half of all the traffic. In Africa now, more people use phones to access their bank online than they do from an actual terminal. So smartphones are much more prevalent in these countries, so you see a lot more of this. These are feature phones. These aren't like your fully featured iOS devices. So again, thinking about that, if you are doing kind of a worldwide app, you're trying to deliver content to everyone, it's not just about Apple devices, it's about all kinds of different devices. So this means new challenges. These are actually old challenges that haven't been important until now. I mean, I'm sure like 4 or 5 years ago, Fluid was like all the rage, right? Elastic layouts were a big deal, but nobody really got onto it. The development was too hard. The need wasn't as big. I mean, the upside was, OK, you take advantage of this giant monitor, but the downside is all this extra work. And now the upside is you're going to get on all these devices, and people can actually view your content. So it's an old challenge, but now there's a new reason for us to attack it. So take HTC, for example. HTC alone has 8 different screen size and resolution combinations on Android, not even counting the orientation, right? And HTC is actually one of the simpler Android lineups. We're not even talking about Acer, Motorola, LG, Sony Ericsson, or the 25 other manufacturers of phones, all who have different resolutions, all who are putting out new devices all the time. And that's just Android phones. iPads, iPhones, Android tablets, Blackberries, Kindles, maybe WebOS, but probably not. So designing a different interface for every single device and screen size is impossible. You can't do it. There's just too many of them out there. They're coming out too quick. But not considering all these different devices is going to be a death sentence. If you want your content to get to the people who want to view it, and you want it to be in a pseudo-presentable way, you need to start thinking about how do I make content as viewable on every single device without killing myself trying to do all these different versions of this stuff. So the old ways of web design don't work. So hi. I'm Matt. I'm from ZURB. ZURB has worked with over 150 startups to create over $1 billion in exits, and we've also worked with a lot of larger companies as well. So we have a pretty interesting perspective as to what companies are trying to do, where they're looking at, and we've done a lot of work with a lot of different companies helping them get there. So I think we have a pretty good perspective of what's going on. And I want to just put a fork in it. 960 is done. Who here knows what I mean when I say 960, right? OK, I'm not going to explain it. It's over, right? 960 was great. It works awesome for desktop devices. We have a lot of good frameworks out there already that address 960, good grid systems. And it's a very simplistic way to look at things, right? Everything is 960 pixels wide. If it's on a larger screen, we just have a nice background color. And if it's on a smaller screen, it just gets shrunk down, right? This works great on desktops. It works pretty good on tablets. And it doesn't really work on phones. And this is Jeremy Keith. He calls this 960 the consensual hallucination. Right? Because everyone believes this, and no one is really going after mobile or thinking about it differently. We've all just kind of been like, well, you know, this mobile thing, whatever, we'll deal with it later. 960 is the world right now. Let's just stick with 960. But like I said before, we have to address these different devices. So how are we going to handle this, right? Are we going to do dedicated apps for every device? Are we going to write device-specific sites? Or maybe is there something better that can address this problem, us having to write a site that works across all different devices? So let's talk about dedicated apps first. They're still difficult to build. If you're delivering content via the web, you're probably a web shop. You're more familiar with markup and JavaScript than you are with like maybe Cocoa. So it's a difficult thing to just jump in and say, we're going to do like iPhone apps or Android apps. These still have to be approved on a slow timetable. If anyone's dealt with the iTunes Store, it's not as fast as just doing a quick deploy at night to push out to your server to get an update. And it always has to move across devices. If we do an iOS app, it's not going to run on Android phone. So you're still coding a separate app for every single device. They're great for Angry Birds. I love Angry Birds. If you're trying to deliver a device specific like a game, then you can go with Angry Birds. I mean, building the app, the native app makes sense in that case. But if you're delivering content, if you're trying to deliver something that's going to be accessible across multiple devices, or you're kind of in that middle area, like Pitch Club, where you have a web app, there's application features there, but it's still content driven. It needs to be accessible everywhere. Obviously, native apps aren't going to work. So what about doing device-specific sites? When I say that, I mean taking your website and skinning it to kind of look like an iOS device site, or maybe it look like an Android app. You're going to put little widgets on there that kind of match the Chrome. That way you can still work in the language you are familiar with, which is web stuff, but you're not actually learning the native stuff. The problem is, of course, it's still heavy on development because you have to do one for each different phone to pull off the facade that, hey, this is kind of a native app, right? They're very difficult to pull off convincingly. And if somebody comes to your site on an Android and it's skinned to look like an iPhone, they're going to be super pissed. If you're using an Android user, you probably don't like iPhones anyway, so you're going to be kind of offended that, like, oh, why would I want this like shiny button, right? So what we'll talk about today is responsive prototyping, but it's actually rapid responsive prototyping, because if we can't do it fast, in the world of startups, getting things out there, then it's not going to make sense business-wise anyway. So what's so great about responsive prototyping? Like, what are the benefits? We're going to be able to prototype for every device very quickly. We're going to cut down significantly on development by using a single code base across all the different devices and screen sizes. So it's going to be less development work. And we're going to be ready for devices that don't exist yet. By looking at this from a responsive viewpoint, we're saying we don't care what the size of the device is. It's still going to work on any screen size and any orientation. So new devices that come out, it's still going to work on those. It's not going to be future-proof, but it's going to be future resilient. So I mean, what is responsive prototyping? What are the principles for building these kind of future-friendly sites? Because again, there's no such thing as future-proof. So I mean, the core concept is responsive prototyping is about giving up control. You're not going to have total control over how your content is going to look on every screen, right? But that's kind of what's happened already. Maybe you're just in denial about that. So you have some content, and your content gets down to your users through a TV, an iOS device, a monitor, an RSS feed. There's all these different ways people are getting at your content, and it's delivered to your users, right? And you have no control over how they get there. So what we're going to do with our responsive way of thinking about things, we're going to start with our content and layer everything else on top of that. It's kind of like progressive enhancement, where we say at least our users need to get their content, and we'll layer in all the pretty stuff on top of that, JavaScript, the fancy nets. If you just get it in the RSS feed, at least be able to read the blog post, see the title, and figure out what's going on. Get to our content we spent all this work creating. And responsive prototyping is about doing practical design reviews. The old way of just firing at Photoshop and creating a template at 960 just isn't good enough anymore, right? This isn't how people are viewing your sites, so why should you be doing all your design reviews on a fixed width? You need to be prototyping and checking them out across every single device as early as possible. So rather than creating your stuff in Photoshop, you should be creating it, at least a skeleton for your site, right in the markup. See how it looks on a phone. How does it look on an iPad, on a desktop? What's the flow going to be like between those different pages? That's what we mean by responsive prototyping. And everywhere else you can, you should test out your content and think through how does your device, or how does your design work everywhere, right? If somebody sees a link to your blog post from a tweet and they click on it, they're going to be on their phone. What's that experience like coming from a tweet or getting back to Twitter? So now we just need something to actually help us do this. So what would a responsive toolkit look like? What are some of the tools to build this framework to help us, rapidly prototype these responsive sites? The most important concept is the most important component is having a flexible, powerful, and most, critically, a fluid grid system. Like I said before, our content is going to flow to all the different device sizes, so it's important that we have a grid that's fluid to do that rather than a fixed width grid. We need to have styles for images that don't care about pixels. Again, because we're going to be working in a fluid grid, our images need to scale up and down for different devices. And we need tested elements like typography, forms, buttons, and base styles that we know these things are just going to work across all of our different resolutions, right? We just want to know we have these core elements that always work in this toolkit. We don't have to kind of go back there, redo buttons, redo forms every time we do a different layout of our site. So indeed, a toolkit like that is why we built Foundation at ZURB. This is blatant self-promotion, but Foundation is a totally open source framework. It's MIT licensed. You can do whatever you want with it. I'm just going to kind of use it as a way to talk around this responsive stuff. But if you go to the documentation site for Foundation, it looks like this on the phone. It looks like this on an iPad, or any tablet for that matter. And it looks like this on a desktop machine. And it's the exact same code base for all three of those places. We're only using a little bit of extra presentational CSS. All the structure for this page, all the base UI elements of the buttons are all part of the base Foundation toolkit. So I kind of want to go into some of these places, explain what these components do in Foundation, how you use them, and why they're useful. So first I want to talk about the grid. In Foundation, we have a 12-column grid that you can nest. It's fluid percentage based with an arbitrary max width. So out of the box, I think the max width is like 1024 or something, so it won't flow past that. Again, there's not a lot of value in thinking about how does, well, it depends on their application. There may not be a lot of value in thinking, how does my app look on ginormous monitors? You're probably more concerned with everything 1024 down, but you can just take off one line of CSS, get rid of the arbitrary max width if you do want to flow the whole width of the page. But by default, we do have an arbitrary max width. And we modify it by media queries for small devices. So we take the perspective on devices. They fall into three categories. We have phones, we have tablets, and we have desktop devices. So of course, we're responsive. Our grid doesn't care too much about what the three classes of devices are. But when we're designing overall, we will use different UI elements for those three classes of devices, like how it's going to look on a tablet. The tablet and desktop don't change too much, but obviously on phones, there's different considerations that we make. We're not going to take the totally purist approach and saying, no, everything has to be completely responsive across every single device. Stuff does need to be a little bit different for phones. But again, we can use the same code base, and we can reuse a lot of the same elements. So I want to illustrate this with an example. Every year at ZURB, we do this thing called ZURB Wired. We pick a nonprofit, and we spend 24 hours building a new website for them, new material, some new print stuff. And we start at 8 a.m., and we have 24 hours. And 8 a.m. the next day, whatever we have, we launch it no matter what. So it has to go to their live site. So it's like a total time crunch thing. This is the end product we had for Rebecca Children's Services. They help with adoption, a really cool nonprofit. And like I said, we do this in 24 hours. So I'll kind of walk you through the process and how we did this with responsive prototyping. So the first thing we did is we did sketches. Sketches are really important. Like they're the fastest way to just get ideas down and show them to other people. Obviously, we had to work with a nonprofit, sell them on why these new pages were cool, why we're going to dump other pages. So we started by just sketching every single page that was going to be in the new site. If it was bad, you just crinkle it up, you throw it away. The time you invest in each sketch is like 5 or 10 seconds when you get really fast at it. A really useful tool for rapidly prototyping at this very low fidelity way. From those sketches, we got about 3 front-end coders who hacked together the entire site in Foundation. And it looked like this. So these are the base Foundation styles. There's a tiny bit of presentational CSS for this hero piece, but it's like 2 lines. The rest of this is all just base Foundation styles. And you can see we can do some fairly complex layouts with just the basic Foundation grid. And I'll show you how this is structured. So again, if you're familiar with grids, this is going to be old stuff. But it's 3 columns on the left. And we have 9 columns on the right. Our hero piece is the full 12 columns. And each of these pieces down here are 4 columns. So there's a little bit of padding that's inserted in between each of the columns that you specify. So everything is nicely separated. And the markup just looks like this. Super straightforward. And again, if you're familiar with grids, you've seen all this stuff before. That outside div is the container, which gives us just a little bit of side padding on the left and the right to make sure our content isn't pushed up right against the edge of the page. Within that, we create our row, which has, again, some padding. It's going to go max width 100%, or if we have our arbitrary max width, it's not going to extend past the 1024 pixels. And within that, we have our 3 columns on the left and our 9 columns on the right. And we end up with a little bit of padding between those 2 columns to make sure everything is spaced out really nicely. We can toss another row below that. And another row below that. We can take a row, and we can nest 2 more rows within that column. And you can keep going crazy. So you can get some pretty complex layouts. Here's another page. It's, again, all in the Foundation-based styles. 8 columns for our hero piece. Within that, we're going to embed a row. 2 columns on the left for the image, and then the remaining 10 columns on the right. So, I mean, just with a little bit of markup, you've got some really nice structure for your page. Right? So that's all good and fine. I talked about how this works really well on mobile. So the responsive portion is when we take a row, this is how it looks on a desktop or a tablet. We have all of our columns next to each other. When we go to phones, we automatically take all those columns and just stack them right on top of each other. So I mean, the app you probably use the most on your phone is email. So you're used to opening email and seeing your content linear top to bottom, right? So the base idea for Foundation is, well, people are used to seeing their content top to bottom. Let's take all the columns and just stack them top to bottom. So right out of the box, if you're using Foundation for your layout, you've got a pretty decent look of how everything is going to be laid out on the phone. They can just scroll top to bottom. Nothing's going to get buried. You can also hide things on mobile. But I'll talk a little bit about that more in a second. So we have these different classes for the grid, 1 column, 2 columns, 3 columns. You can offset your columns if you want to take your columns, put some space next to them. And you can just center the columns if you want to do a center type layout. You can just say 3 columns centered. Those columns will be in the middle of the row. So I mentioned images before. Our images need to scale up or down depending on what the grid tells them to do. So the width of our image is just whatever, right? Whatever the content tells the image to be, that's going to be the width. The CSS declaration we use for that is max width 100%. This ensures that the image is never stretched past its native size. But as it gets pushed down, the image will shrink down. Because remember, responsive prototype is all about giving up control. We don't know how our content is going to be viewed. The image can be viewed at any different size. So images in responsive design, they have to be able to scale for different devices. They have to be large enough to handle the very large screens. Because again, we're not going to scale them up. So when they reach their native width, they're just going to stop. And if you're concerned about loading very large images on a mobile device, then there's some really cool backend solutions. So Foundation doesn't deal with anything on the backend. It's totally a front-end framework. If you want to do some neat stuff, Scott Gel has a responsive images solution that's really cool. It lets you serve different image sizes for different devices. Because obviously, if we're doing these like giant, megapixel images for the big screens, we don't want to serve those same things on the phone. You're going to take forever to load the page. So typography, forms, and buttons. At ZURB, we're really big on CSS buttons. I don't know if you guys have seen any of our button blog posts. There's like a ton of button stuff. I don't know. These guys are like button nuts. So here's what the buttons look like in Foundation. On an anchor tag, just add the class small blue button, and you get a small blue button, right? Very straightforward. Looks pretty good. There's other colors in there. We could also have a large blue button. A large blue radius button gives it a little bit of corner rounding, right? That's really hot. And a large nice radius button. This is, I think, the only image in all of Foundation is this little button shine. So if you want to get that shine on the button, add the nice class. Looks a little prettier. So again, going back to Rebecca Children's Services, we went from the wireframes to building out the entire site in 2 hours. 3 front-end coders were just like going through all those sketches and throwing together this framework that we could then look at. From there, it took the other guys about 7 hours to go from that to the actual visual design. So the huge advantage of us doing this is we were able to take those wireframes on the left, the basic site and Foundation, gave it to the development team, so they start hooking everything up with the content backend. So they're working on that in parallel to the front-end team doing the visual design, and this actually worked. It's kind of crazy. And at the end, they just added the CSS, and we got the styling for that. So that way, we were able to have our visual designers doing all the fancy work in Photoshop, chopping stuff up. In parallel to the developers, it let us do this entire site. I think it has like 20 pages on it. We got the whole thing done. It looked really sharp in our 24 hours. So here's what the final site looks like on a browser on the desktop. Here's what it looks like on a tablet device. Mostly the same, but you can see some of the stuff has flowed down a little bit. And here's what it looks like on a phone. So before I talked about how we address phones differently from the browser, the desktop. So we actually use a different nav element on the top. We use one that's stacked top to bottom, so you can get to where you're trying to go really quickly on the phone. But the other stuff is just being stacked like I showed you. So that hero piece shrinks down to that width. We have the image, and all the other content is just down below. You can just scroll and get everything that you need. So you guys were promised to talk about responsive web apps, and I'm going to talk a little about web apps. Those are mostly content sites. We just talked about Rebecca Children's Services. This is a web app that we launched. It's totally free. It's called Spur. It lets you do visual design critiques online. So you upload an image, and then you can apply these different filters to do a really quick visual design critique. So like, I know you guys have heard of like the squint test. Take your visual design, squint. If it still looks good, then it's a good design. So this lets you just kind of do that. It's kind of a training tool. It uses Foundation. It doesn't use the responsive grid, but it does use the targeting of the 3 different classes of devices: desktop, tablet, and mobile. So this is what Spur looks like on a desktop device. And then on the iPad, we remove some of the things that don't make sense. So it's a simpler layout on the top. In Foundation, we have these classes you can apply to any element. You can just say, hide this on a tablet, hide this on a phone, or only show this on desktops, so that those elements are only shown on those devices. It still gets served to every device, because again, Foundation is just running in the browser client side. But it lets you really quickly, when you're prototyping, just say, yeah, don't show this nav for the tablet, only show it for the desktop. So we're showing a different share element that stacks below it. It uses the space a little bit better on the tablet device. We modify the actions a little bit. Going down to the phone, we're still using that same nav on the top, but that's just a UL with some LI elements in it. We're just hiding the LIs that don't make sense anymore. So now that we're on a phone, like the rotate test doesn't really make sense anymore, because you can just take the phone and rotate it, or just turn your head. So we hid that and some of the other ones, so we can make sure that all those buttons are still clickable. I think the usability guideline, you need to have, I think it's like 15 pixels by 50 pixels at least for each clickable area on a phone. So using that as the guideline, we said, OK, how many filters can we actually get in the top that are still going to be clickable without you being frustrated hitting the wrong thing? So we got rid of the ones that didn't make sense. We're still able to deliver a pretty good experience on the phone, but we're using Foundation to just deliver the things that make sense. So this is another app called Axe. Axe lets you critique a website by just cutting stuff off of it. And this one is, I don't even know what you would call this. I guess it's responsive in the way that we serve a very different experience for each class of device. So this is the home page, how it looks across all 3 different devices, and it's totally different. Axe is a touch app, so you have to be able to touch the screen to actually axe stuff off and take it off the page. So it doesn't make sense. You can't actually use that portion of the app on a desktop or a mobile device. So on mobile devices, we're using those classes again, where we just show a different div. It says on mobile, sorry, only works on tablets. But here's a video where you can watch how it works. Same thing for the desktop. And in the tablet device, we do show the actual experience. And the markup just looks like this. We have 3 different divs. The first one says show this on desktop, show on phones, show on tablets. So if you're using Foundation, you can just use these classes to only show elements on certain devices. If you have a huge amount of markup in each one of these tags, then maybe you don't want to use it when you go to production. But while you're prototyping, it's a super quick and easy way to say, just show this on the phone. Let's look at the phone and see how it's going to go. Right? When you get to production, you can put something on your server code where you can sniff the user agent and say, all right, don't serve this on these certain devices. For this, we don't have a lot of markup in each one of these divs, so we actually rolled a production with this. The page weight still wasn't that bad, so we just went with it, and it was fine. This is what one of the content pages on app looks like. This is the About page explaining more of what app is. So you can see, again, on the desktop and the tablet, the experience is pretty similar. But on the right, on the phone, we've taken all the elements and we've stacked them top to bottom. So it's really easy to read. You can just scroll down, and all the elements look the same. And even if you look at the text on the tablet versus the desktop device, you can see the text is wrapping differently because we're using the widths. So I'm going to show you a video of actually going through Axe on the tablet. You type in a URL. I did CBS Interactive. And when you click on Axe it, we're going to actually capture that page. So on mobile devices, people don't always know what the touch interactions are. So while we're waiting for this to load, we actually show a little infographic, all in JavaScript, of what the different touch interactions are. You can scribble on there to add notes. You can touch and hold to add a note. Or you can use 2 fingers to scroll up and down. And by the time you're done watching that, the page is loaded, and we can see the CBS Interactive page. So I'm going to scratch out this marquee thing. You can't see it here because they didn't capture it with a server capture tool, which is kind of lame. But there's this marquee tag type thing. And then I can touch and hold and say, no marquee, please. Or, let's not get the marquee tag thing. This is kind of my Axe feedback, right? Scroll back up. I can give it a quick little title by tapping up there. And say update. So that's what the experience is like on the tablet device for actually capturing a page, scratching something out, and giving some quick feedback. So when I clicked on that, tap the title on the top, you saw that little modal pop up. It looked a little slow. So this is Axe in kind of a development mode. I'm just going to click on these things a couple times. It feels a little sluggish. There's this common perception that HTML5 apps on mobile devices are slow. And part of that is anytime you click and you're binding to the click handler to perform an event from a click somewhere, there's a 300 millisecond delay that's inserted by the device because they're waiting for you to double click to zoom, right? Because that's what the device is for the touch event. So if you bind to a click event, it's not going to fire 300 milliseconds. Maybe you didn't notice it right there, but each one of those clicks had a 300 millisecond delay. If you build a whole app around that, the whole thing feels kind of sluggish, like you're moving through a little bit of honey. So even though we're saying you can't scale this window up or down, use your scalable 0, it doesn't matter. The iOS device is still going to say, no, we're going to wait for that double tap. I think the latest build of Android will respect this and won't put that delay in, saying, hey, they're not going to scale the window anyway. I'm not going to wait for that double tap, and they're going to fire the click event right away. But I know for a fact right now on iOS, that's not the case. So maybe they'll change that. But just so you can see how pronounced that is, we actually look at the contrast. So here I have it set up, when you click on tap to title, it's going to open it with the touch event, which does not have the delay. And then it's going to close the modal with the click event, which has the 300 millisecond delay. So see if you can see the difference between the two clicks. When you see them side by side, it's really pronounced like what the difference is. At 300 milliseconds makes a huge difference in the user perception of what's going on, right? It's like, what's going on? Is it kind of thinking? They may not cognitively or consciously realize what's going on, but there's just this perception that's created like, oh, the whole app is kind of slow. jQuery Mobile has the same problem where, because they've taken the hard line of saying we're going to support every single device with these touch events, they have a branch that does the touch, that does have the delay, but the master branch of jQuery Mobile uses the click event. So every jQuery Mobile app that's in the wild right now has this delay. That's why they all feel a little sluggish. And it just kind of creates the perception that like, yeah, mobile apps are just not that cool that are in the browser, HTML5 apps.
You bind to a different event, like mouse down and mouse up?
Totally. So you can bind to the mouse down event, which is my next point. So you can bind to the mouse down, the touch event, or whatever. Mouse down, actually, I don't know if that helps you. But you can bind to touch, which will fire immediately. But the problem with touch is, again, on iOS devices, and I believe on most tablet devices, if you want to then focus on that input area, you can only do that from a callback on a click event. So we're working through this, right? We want to be able to, you tap on that, the text area should come up, it should focus on it, bring up the keyboard. That's the best visual indicator that, hey, I want you to type something in, right? That's way better than having it open. It's like, oh, okay, I click on the input, right? Removing user clicks is always great for a good user experience, and we're all about making people happy. So, but you can't do that. I don't even know how they pull this off, but on tablet devices, if you touch and you bind the touch event, and then you try to say, focus this text area, it just doesn't work. It just ignores it. If you do it from a click event, then it does. So here we have to make this choice. I don't know if you guys read Penny Arcade. All right. We have to make this choice where, do I want to either have the fast touch event, or do I want to be able to autofocus on that? And our experience developing Axe was that doing mobile stuff on HTML5, there's just a lot of trade-offs. You have to decide, what do I want? Do I want the kick in the butt or the poke in the eye? What's it going to be? So we opted here for the focusing the text event. So we're going to have the delay, which sucks. People have to wait for 30 milliseconds. Not as pronounced if you're trying to actually move something on the screen or perform some different actions. We're just trying to open a dialog. So we decided to go with the delay because it's just really nice to have you click on that and then have the keyboard pop right up, and you can see, OK, I'm going to type something in, right? It's a lot of choices. The other thing is, some stuff just actually is slower on mobile, right? If we're doing AJAX requests, we want the user to feel like they're in control of the interface. So we want everything to react very quickly. At least give them a visual indicator right away that, hey, something happened. So here we are going to bind the touchdown event. But when you click on the share button in the top right, the send notable, we immediately swap that out for a spinner saying hey, something's happening, right? That action took about maybe a second and a half to run, which doesn't seem like a lot, but gave that immediate indication that something's happening on the mobile device. Makes people feel like there's stuff going on. Again, they're coming in using this app with the preconception that it's going to be kind of slow. If you can make it fast instead, they're going to be like, oh, I thought this was slow. It's really fast. I'm a happy person. Same thing for this button in the top right. This is our share action. So another thing, we're talking about tablet devices versus desktop devices. When we let you share this on Axe, there's no point in us doing the traditional share, which is just a text area where you can then copy and paste a link, right? This is what we're kind of programmed to do. To share something, grab a link, share it on Twitter or whatever. On mobile, that's really painful. I have to tap and hold, select the whole thing, copy it, go to another app like Twitter, and then paste it. It's really painful. So why do that? We can just do a mail to. Mail to suck on desktop devices because not a lot of people have the default mail client hooked up. But on tablets and on phones, everyone has their default mail client hooked up. So mail to becomes an extremely powerful tool for you to use on tablet and phone devices. I mean, you saw how nice that experience is on the iPhone. It actually pops that overlay, mail overlay, right over your browser. It's pretty sweet. So once we've shared something on Axe, we have a URL. So this is what, if I had taken that email that's my buddy and he was opening my feedback, this is what it would look like on the iPad. It looks pretty much the same. You can't draw it anymore, and now we have a share button that's the same thing that we saw. It pops up the email, or we could access another page if you wanted to do that. So this is where it becomes responsive again. So before we were saying you can't create pages on the desktop, but now we actually have a desktop version. So if you take this and you share it, this part of the app is responsive. And then I see this on my desktop device. So if somebody emailed me and I opened it in Chrome, I see this. Most of the content is exactly the same because we're using Foundation. It just scales up. And in the top right, now we're going to use the more traditional sharing mechanism of Twitter, Facebook, and an input text area. Because now on my computer, I probably have email open, I copy, I paste it, I tweet it out, whatever. That makes sense on a desktop device. And this is what it looks like on a phone. Most of that doesn't really make sense, so we just hide it. So we are using some different nav elements. We're just getting rid of the nav altogether. Again, we want to make sure that you can actually click on things. So it's a big share button to show this feedback. It does the same thing the tablet device does. It's going to pop up in your email client. And we shrink everything down so that it fits. Even the size of the notes is smaller. And obviously, on a phone, you don't have hover. So you can't hover to see a note. So these are tap. You can toggle them on and off. On the desktop, you just hover over each note. So there's all these different considerations you have to make when you're thinking about how is my content going to be consumed across all these 3 different devices, right? Can I create content on 3 devices? And if not, can I at least share it? So because once you let someone open that email and send it out, you've then given up all of your control, right? We're going to force you when you interact. You have to do it on a tablet. That's kind of sucky, but that's the way it's going to be. But when you send the content out, it needs to work everywhere. When someone opens that email, if they're on a tablet, their phone, their desktop, they need to be able to open it and see it without any problems. So another little pro tip, technical challenge of working in the responsive world, if you're storing these annotations on different devices, make sure you're storing them as percentage values and not as an actual like absolute pixel value. So right, we're storing the height of this. We're going to store it as like 0.34142, whatever, not 80 pixels on the outside and the top. By storing it as a percentage width, we just do this math over here, and we can display it on any size image. Because remember, we don't know what size the image is going to be. So later we pull it from the database. We want to actually render these notes out. We just take our percentage width and height, multiply them by the actual width and height, and we can see it. The downside of this is that we have to know what's the size of this image. And we don't know what that image size is until it's loaded. So if you have a super long image, they may be waiting for a while on mobile until they see any of the notes. So again, it's about trade-offs, right? Sophie's choice. What do you want? Do you want to wait to load the image, to load the note, have it work on every single device? Or do you want to have it load as soon as it shows up on the page, but then it's not going to be responsive? So what else can we do with these responsive layouts, right? Kind of what's the mental model around this? Again, like I was talking about before, understanding the user intention on the mobile device is huge, right? When we sent the email from Axe, we're sharing this link. I just want to view it. My intention is to just view the thing, so just show it to me. Whatever device I'm at, make that viewing experience really easy, right? If I'm on the tablet, I want to create something, let me just create it very easily. Content first and navigation later. When you're design with the content in mind, don't start getting into this hierarchy. That tends to break down other devices where you have these very large navs on the mobile device that don't really work. Get your content in there first, nav later. On mobile, it's totally cool to take your nav and throw it down below the content, right? If I'm coming in from Twitter and I want to see a blog link, the first thing I don't want to see is like 10 navigation items to other parts of your site. Just show me the title, show me the content, let me read it and get back to my tweets. And be mindful of different events like touch events versus click and hover state. Again, on tablets, there is no hover state. How are you addressing that? And watch out for things like the like button, right? We're used to just taking a like button, just drop it on a page, wham, we have Facebook integration. If you try the like button on a mobile app, it generates something like, I don't know, 30 HTTP requests. It's just going to drag your whole site down. It's really slow. The current one is not optimized for mobile. You're probably better off using the super old school one. It's just a link. The actual iframe like button totally sucks on mobile devices and causes all kinds of weird problems. And it's obviously not responsive because it's an iframe. For JavaScript, Moderniser is a great tool for feature detection. Again, we're talking about layering things on. If you want to use stuff like local storage, Moderniser is awesome. If you haven't checked it out, definitely look at that. And then we package 2 JavaScript plugins in Foundation, Orbit and Reveal. Orbit is a fully responsive image slider, and Reveal is a pretty basic modal tool that's also responsive, pops the modals up. So I want to talk a little bit about Orbit and the technical challenge we had to overcome to make it work on responsive devices. So this is what Orbit looks like on Foundation. It's fully responsive, so it's going to shrink or contract to whatever the width of the column that it's in. So of course, you resize your browser up or down, Orbit's going to size up or down. Most image sliders have a fixed height and a fixed width, so they can do all the math as to how they're going to do the animations to slide the images. They can slide them top to bottom. They have to know where everything is, right? We took a little bit of a different tack with Orbit, where we said we're going to use absolute positioning to do our sliding, and we're not going to do overflow hidden on our container, which puts some more constraints on us, but we ultimately kind of got it working. So the two things that Orbit does that other places don't do, again, is we're using absolute positioning for the stuff behind it to slide pieces around, and we also have overflows not hidden. What was the other thing? You can also have content slides in Orbit. So it's not just images. And content creates another problem where if I just have 5 slides of content, like divs with markup in it, those aren't going to shrink up and down just like images do, right? Maybe something we take for granted is that images, as you change the width of an image, the height changes also. It maintains that aspect ratio as we're scrolling the page up and down. That doesn't happen for divs. So for our image slider, we had to find a way to do that. So what we do is we actually go through each one of the images in the slider. We find the largest one, which represents hopefully the size of the whole slider. Take it, we copy it to the back, position it relative to everything else, so it kind of holds everything together, and we make it invisible, and then everything just slides on top of that. So that way, as you scroll the page up and down, as this thing flows, that image is maintaining the aspect ratio for your whole slider, so that it still slides up or down. So this is this kind of like hidden div behind it is going to slide up and down. If you don't have an image, if you're using an all-content slider, then you can specify an aspect ratio when you fire up Orbit. Obviously, if it's just content, we need to know, like, OK, well, like, how tall do you want it? What's the aspect ratio, right? There is no width and height in fluid programming. So you can just say, I want this content to be 16 by 9 on my slider. We use placehold it, which serves up placeholder images. And we just get a 16 pixel by 9 pixel image. We take it, we stretch it out to be the size of the entire container, and then we use that. So again, using the magical property of images, where the height shrinks up and down with the width, we can then have our image slider be totally slidable up and down, just by using the placeholder service. And then everything slides nice and happily across all these different devices, even if you're using all content slides. So there's definitely some interesting challenges to making all of this stuff we've always taken for granted working in these fluid and responsive designs. But it's kind of fun to work on. On the server side, there's still things we can do to have a responsive site. You can just send people to a mobile site if you don't want to do the responsive layout. That's the thing you can do. Optimizing requests and caching. Firebug, YSlow, and PageSpeed are all great tools that you use on the desktop to just see how many HTTP requests do you have, is everything caching properly. The optimization may not get you a ton for desktop users, but it goes a huge way for mobile users. If you have an app that has a lot of pages within it, you're not caching your assets every time, and they're having to pull down all of your JavaScript for every single page load, it's ridiculous. It's really going to hog the thing down. Even if you're caching your JavaScript across different pages, the browser still has to render the JavaScript across each page. So different things you can do is splitting the JavaScript up. All the rules that apply for the desktop that these tools show you, they apply for the mobile device as well. So again, being very fastidious about, I'm going to have all my requests be cached, going to have them be fast, is going to go a really long way for making your mobile people very happy. And then creating device profiles to better tailor content delivery. Like I was saying, there's 3 classes of devices: mobile devices, tablets, and desktops. So this is how we have to build now. There's really no going back. I don't think mobile devices are going away. Phones aren't going away. And there's really not going to be some kind of like magical technology solution that's going to make all of your pages look really good, right? The whole pinch to zoom thing, it kind of works, but it's not great. So again, just to review, like what are the things that we should be doing? Design reviews on real layouts, right? Get out of Photoshop as early as you can. Just get the code. You just need to have this stuff blocked out in the pages. Just see, how does it look? How's the content going to flow up and down on all the different devices? Sites that work well on arbitrary devices. We don't know what tablet's going to come from HTC next month. Who knows? We've seen like so many crazy resolutions. So part of Foundations, we have to maintain all of these different media queries to be able to determine like what the device is, right? Media queries have an attribute that says like, is this a handheld or not? They don't work, they're not implemented. The only thing you have that we have in Foundation, the only tool that we have, is looking at the dimensions of the device, and based on that, we've created all these different rules to test every single app we can get our hand on, every tablet. We've tried them out and see, okay, flag this as a tablet, flag this as a mobile device. So we're creating this like huge wizardry of logic to work on all these arbitrary devices, including devices that don't quite exist yet. So the challenge for us is to keep getting new devices and testing them. The challenge for you is just use Foundation and be happy that we have this library of media queries for you. So that's how you prototype quickly for a future-friendly site. That's all I've got.